Hi, I'm just a fat little Asian man, and this is a video that I made. Pretty much just trying to make sense of Asian racism. Honestly, I thought it'd be fun to talk about and just kinda uploaded it without much thought. To my surprise, a lot of people watched it, and the comments sparked some interesting conversations and experiences about racism. But there was one topic that consistently popped up in the comments: Balkan racism. And yeah, I wasn't familiar with it at all. If this Balkan racism is anything like, or even bigger than Asian racism, naturally I wanted to learn more about it. The more I researched, the more I felt this sense of deja vu. The mentality of we may hate each other, but are united in our dislike of others, seemed oddly familiar, like a distant cousin. And then it hit me: Asia's most competitive racism server, Southeast Asia. Now, some of you might be thinking, what could the Balkans and Southeast Asia possibly have in common with each other when they're separated by roughly 10,000 kilometers with completely different histories, cultures, and languages? Trying to find meaningful similarities sounds pretty dumb. And okay, yeah, they aren't exactly the same, but you'd be surprised how similar they are. The over the top relationship of how everyone manages to both hate and be each other's best friends at the same time. The loudest, longest nationalistic fights about everybody trying to prove how their ancestors civilized everybody else's Neanderthal predecessors. Each region even has countries with similar positions too. Bulgarians and Macedonians fighting is like Malaysians and Indonesians. Nobody cares except for the two parties involved. Slovenia and Singapore just count money while everybody is fighting, while Montenegro and Brunei never get mentioned. The most interesting thing for me is that even with all this fighting inside, they are best friends out of their own regions. Like peak friend groups in Germany consist of at least 3 different Balkaners, and I've seen Thais and Cambodians be best friends in South Korea. So, how did this unique form of racism develop in such different backgrounds of the world? Well, it's because they share a similar history, one filled with diverse ethnic and religious relationships, thousands of wars and historical conflicts that make the Geneva Convention look like my thesis diaper. While the intense racism in both the Balkans and Southeast Asia might be a little heavy for some, don't worry. As someone recently enlightened by both the rich intellectualism of Southeast Asia and the Balkans, let's embark on a journey to understand racism in these regions together, and how racism might actually bring everyone closer to each other. Let's start by introducing the Balkans: Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Croatia, Greece, Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, Romania, Serbia, Slovenia, and Turkey. Together, they make up the world's most alcoholic family. Like most alcoholics, they're really dysfunctional, as in they fight all the time, but they're also each other's best drinking mates. You might think it's the constant alcoholism that makes the Balkans fight incessantly, but it's actually their history where Balkan racism is made. You see, the Balkans share a rich and complex history that is all crammed in this relatively small region in Europe. As an Asian, I cannot hope to explain this history perfectly. But don't worry, any inaccuracies will be pointed out by Balkaners in the comments. Now, the reason for all this lore in the Balkans is because of its geography. The Balkans are located in southern Europe, sitting on the intersection between Asia and Europe, as well as being surrounded by a couple of seas, making it a mandatory checkpoint for trade and exchange of cultures. Acting as the gateway to Europe or Asia wasn't always just trade and cultures, though. It also filled the Balkans with many wars and conflicts. Here's just a few: Greece versus Persia, East and West Rome, the Mongol invasion, Byzantine Empire and the Ottoman Empire, both world wars. Yeah, the Balkans have been through a lot. All this fighting and trade caused a constant movement of people, shaping the region to be the crossroads of many cultures, ethnicities, and religions. All this complex and diverse history makes it difficult even for peak Balkan intellectuals to come to a perfect understanding of their own history. This is why one of the biggest parts of Balkan racism is basically fighting about which country's ancestors came first and spread civilization to the other barbarian cavemen in the rest of the Balkans. For example, Bulgarians say that they taught everyone how to read, Serbs say they are responsible of bringing Byzantine culture, Turks claim about how food in the Balkans is actually all Turkish, and Greeks talk about how Ataturk is Greek for the millionth time, and the list goes on. Now, a few thousand miles around the globe is Southeast Asia, where you can meet the ASEANs: Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, Vietnam, and Timor-Leste. They're not as alcoholic as the Balkans, but they're just as dysfunctional. They have a we hate each other equally, so we're the only ones allowed to bully each other dynamic going on as well. Their geography is pretty similar too. Like the Balkans, Southeast Asia is also the intersection that connects huge civilizations together. On land, they're bordered by China and India, while through sea, they act as the maritime gateway between Europe and Asia. Naturally, the region became the center of global trade routes for centuries, also acting as the migration hub in Asia. Many trade-rich countries like the Khmer Empire and the Srivijayan Empire emerged from the mix of cultures, religions, and people from around the world. Of course, getting rich off trade meant that everybody else wanted to control over the region to get rich off themselves. Not only did ancient kingdoms constantly fight each other, China and Indian dynasties, Islamic sultanates, and Europeans constantly took turns dividing, conquering, and redrawing borders. All this chaos made the region extremely diverse. Over several hundred ethnicities and languages live side by side, with all four major religions present. Much like the Balkans, a big part of Southeast Asian racism comes from debating which pristine culture civilized the rest. Vietnam and Cambodia fight about who saved whose country all the time. Filipinos will claim they're the world's most powerful race while constantly watching some white girls' OnlyFans. Laotians hate Uncle Roger because Lao food supremacy, and Timor-Leste is here, somewhere. Now, some of you doubters may be thinking, does that mean the Balkans and Southeast Asians are just confused about their chaotic history? And first of all, if they knew English, you might start coughing in 3 days. And secondly, no, it's because both the Balkans and Southeast Asians are very, very nationalistic. Just go on their League of Legends lobbies and you can find out yourself. Nationalism is the biggest reason the Balkans are a big meme in the world today. It could be the same for SEA, but nobody understands their languages, Rip. I've already told you that both the Balkans and Southeast Asia have been through a lot of conflicts due to its location being stuck between massive civilizations. All the chaos from fighting and conquering meant that there was usually multiple empires that controlled different parts of each region. For a ruling empire, categorizing the region into religious or ethnic communities made it much easier to rule over the extremely diverse ethnicities and cultures. For the Balkans, this is especially true during the Ottoman Empire's rule. Before the Ottomans, the Balkans consisted of various empires, kingdoms, and tribal territories with their own political autonomy with overlapping religious and cultural traditions. Simply, this means that divides in the Balkans were mostly which side of the river you drank and which version of Christianity your ruler told you to believe. When the Ottomans took over the Balkan region, they erased all the pre-existing borders and instead divided them up into arbitrary lines. And we all know what happens when you do that. The Ottomans used religion as a system to rule over others, creating a hierarchy with Muslims at the top with Christians on the bottom. If you were a Muslim, you got to enjoy benefits in land, courts, and status, while if you're a Christian, you needed to pay more taxes and sacrifice your eldest son to become a Yenichari killing machine. Every region was then split into religious communities called millets. Each were allowed a little autonomy, but were basically segregated for nearly 500 years. It's not that much different in Southeast Asia too. Remember when I said that the region is home to hundreds of ethnicities and languages? Naturally, that made Southeast Asia a sprawling landscape of kingdoms and sultanates, all fighting each other for influence over trade routes and whose religion is the best. This was all normal. As kingdoms fell and emerged, it became its own kind of ecosystem and international dynamics. Of course, everything changed when the colonizers attacked, and they did what they do best, blending centuries old kingdoms and dozens of other ethnicities into arbitrary borders. What ended up happening was you've had countries where former enemies and rivals were suddenly living in the same neighborhoods. For example, Khmers, Laos, and Vietnamese, who were each other's rivals for centuries, suddenly had to work side by side in French Indochina. On top of this, many colonizers brought millions of Chinese and Indian laborers into Southeast Asia, creating sudden new socio-ethnic classes on the already chaotic colonies. Another colonizer classic was to favor certain ethnic minorities into colonial elites to fuel resentment and prevent unified resistance. Some examples are Indian migrants were used as police for the locals and Muslims in British Malaya, or like how the Karen minority was given exclusive military ranks over the Burman majority in Burma. In American terms, this would be like if you colonized Chicago and forcibly made people from LA and New York live as roommates, then brought over British and French as laborers while making Canadians rule over everybody. As colonial powers became weaker, though, all the segregation, unequal social structures, and resentment fostered over the years exploded out into nationalist movements. Nationalism was indeed the natural response when your country is being taken over by a foreign force. However, even after their long awaited independence, these newly emerging nations went through excruciating post independence periods, just trying to piece together fragmented countries and systems. What usually ended up happening was just a lot of war, corrupt governments, and inhumane massacres. Most post colonial governments just went for the true and try strategy of exploiting ethno religious divisions to solidify their power, aka making policies that benefit the majority group and nationalism to gain their support. Most of the time, leaders would exploit the us vs them mentality by portraying neighboring countries and minorities as national threats. In Europe, the entire 20th century was just pure chaos, especially for the Balkans. The Ottoman Empire's grip on the Balkan states were loosening, with many states fighting for independence in the Balkan Wars. That independence came at a cost of entire borders being redrawn completely, forcibly relocating entire populations. It didn't help at all that both world wars had completely devastated the region, with mass atrocities committed by fascist puppet states. After all that disaster, the Balkans took a short intermission, where there was a period of peace, united as Yugoslavia by Joseph Tito and communism. After Tito died, though, it wouldn't take much for everything to just fall apart again. And surprise, surprise, leaders turned to nationalism yet again for power. Only this time, escalated tensions would explode into the Yugoslav wars. It was more or less a bloody contest to see who could ignore the Geneva Convention the most, with many battles and genocides. All the fighting, dead people, broken homes, and genocide created massive displacement and deep mistrust, splitting up the region even more. It made sense for leaders to integrate nationalism into education, diplomatic, and economic policies, as they were just so widespread in the region. Such policies made it more difficult for reconciliation, and nationalism and racism was more encouraged at the time. The 20th century was also a disaster in SCA, with colonizers changing from European to Japanese back to European in a few years. The post-war was extremely chaotic, as newly independent states struggled to rebuild from the ashes of World War II and decades of colonial rule. It's the same old story. Different groups competed to fill the power vacuum. Most used radical ideas of nationalism, attempting to stabilize and unite a fragmented country. Malaysia, Indonesia, Myanmar, Philippines, Cambodia, all of them. With all this instability going around in Southeast Asia, the region became a kind of breeding grounds for Cold War conflicts, where ethnic divisions kind of merged with ideological ones. Addition of major powers as patrons led to local disputes being further amplified. You'd be radicalized too if most of your neighborhood was bombed into the ground, genocides in your next door neighbor, and border skirmishes still going on to this day. Indonesian communist leader Sukarno launched a war in the region because he was convinced that Malaysia was created to kill Indonesia. After his regime failed, Indonesia then spent their time massacring their own ethnic minorities instead. Myanmar went into its own disaster, where Buddhist nationalists led the ethnic cleansing on the Muslim Rohingyas, even to this day. All the complex ethnic tensions built throughout a history of exchange and conflict were heightened through over a century of colonialism. Then, they were radicalized through the post-war independence period, shaping the good old racism in these regions we know today. The crazy, over-the-top, degenerate nationalist comments, fighting over who suffered more, who is the superior civilization, pointing which country is a NATO or Chinese sellout, loving atrocities and denying war crimes. All of this was shaped throughout its history. Here's the thing though, while racism is still a very real issue, it's become part of an unexpected story of regional unity. In both the Balkans and Southeast Asia, generations have been shaped by histories of conflict, trauma, and rivalry. Yet, they've been turning their ironic nationalism and racism into memes. Over time, as efforts for cooperation through regional frameworks like ASEAN, EU integration, and others push each region for stability, modernization, and reconciliation, more and more generations are stepping away from old historical grudges and have been creating a sense of unity throughout their shared experiences. The more memes and social media poke fun at stereotypes and nationalist pride, there's more conversation and friendships. Shared experiences with food, corrupt governments, terrible infrastructure, and alcoholism give something people to bond over, both online and in real life. All this is helping people move forward, showing that even the most historical enemies can be friends. In the end, maybe all this racism isn't just a tragic legacy, but a sign that these regions are finding ways to make peace with the past. Sometimes by laughing at it together. And also, apparently Serbia wants to join ASEAN, so you guys might actually be a family very soon. Thanks for watching another video made by my smooth brain. If you're interested in videos like this about Southeast Asia, please subscribe because more is definitely on the way. I hear this one in Cambodia is pretty decent.